Up until this point, Paul, his ministry,
Where are we?
and
Acts 25,
Acts chapter 25, and we're going to pick it up in verse 13. And Paul's thus far has had a pretty interesting run, pretty interesting life. And we know that Paul was born in AD 4, some say it's AD 5. We also know that he was a member of the Sanhedrin, which couldn't take place until he was 30 years old. We see that the Damascus Road experience was roughly AD 34, so that puts him right around that 30-31 mark. Then he's had now approximately almost 30 years of ministry, 30 years of walking with the Lord, 30 years of being a Christian. And you'd think by now it would get easier, in the sense that in the beginning of Paul's ministry and in his walk, you'll see him going from one village to the next. And at first they openly accept him, they love him. Then because it doesn't conform with their beliefs and they are faced with some hard choices, they then pick up stones and stone him. They flog him. They throw him out. And you'd think that as life went on, he'd kind of learn either to shy away or to do things differently. But that's not his conviction. And it actually gets harder and harder. And now we see Paul in the last stages of his life, because he's going to die roughly in about another 2 years' time from this point. And we kind of see him saying, okay, fine, enough with all the questions and interrogations, let me go to Caesar. And he's been examined by the governor Felix, and that was a farce, because Felix basically was keeping him captive so that he could get money. And then not Felix, it was Festus, I beg your pardon. Festus was holding him captive so he could get a bribe. He did so for about 2 years. Festus then gets booted out by Rome, and Felix comes in. Felix comes in, listens to the whole argument from the Jews, the Sanhedrin, and can't find anything to actually lay a charge against Paul. So right now, Felix has got a problem, because Paul has been held captive for 2 years. He's a Roman citizen. He wasn't given a fair trial. He hasn't been set free, and he hasn't been charged. So Felix now has got a huge problem, because Paul has said, enough's enough. I want to go to Caesar and be heard by Caesar. So when Caesar hears this and doesn't find Paul guilty of anything, finds that there's no official charge against Paul, Felix is going to be in trouble, basically. So Felix comes up with a plan, and what he does is he then goes and appeals to this Agrippa, King Agrippa. And Agrippa, as we said, he's almost like a puppet king. His strings are being pulled by Rome. And what he does is he's basically going in front of Agrippa, and he's saying to Agrippa, hey, I've tried to sort this mess out. Now this guy said he wants to go to Caesar. I need to be able to go to Caesar and say, hey, this is the formal charge, and it needs to be something of substance. Otherwise, my head is on the block here, and I'm going to be in trouble for this lot. So help me out. So in verse 13 of chapter 25, it starts off, and it says, and after some days, King Agrippa and Bernice came to Caesarea to greet Festus. Now, we spoke about this woman, Bernice, and she's basically she's a wicked little run-around harlot, and we see her jumping from one man to another, and she's basically following the power and the money. That's how she's moving around. She's also the half-sister of Agrippa, which makes it even more incestuous. And then later on, we actually see that she'll move over to the next person, the next emperor, and then comes back to Agrippa. So she bounces all over the place. So verse 14, when they had been there many days, Festus laid Paul's case before the king, saying, this is a certain man left a prisoner by Felix, about whom the chief priests and the elders of the Jews informed me, when I was in Jerusalem asking for a judgment against him. To them I answered, it is not the custom of Romans to deliver any man to destruction before the accursed meets his accusers face to face and has the opportunity to answer for himself concerning the charge against him. So he's basically waxing pretty eloquently here and making sure that on the record he's got a decent defense, because the Romans, their practice was to record everything. And that's a huge part of our Christian faith, is based upon a lot of the recordings and writings of these Roman historians. And so he's basically setting down a defense before this matter gets up to Rome. So verse 17, therefore, when they come together without any delay, the next day I sat in the judgment seat, and commanded the man to be brought in. So I'm demanding that Paul gets brought in, and he's going to face his accusers. Verse 18, when the accusers stood up, they brought no accusation against him of such things as I supposed, but had some questions against him about their own religion, and about a certain Jesus who had died, whom Paul affirmed to be alive. So right here, he's turning around and saying, yeah, they've asked me to judge him, but I'm a Roman judge. And these things of the Jewish religion and the Jewish faith, that means absolutely nothing to me. The reason why the Romans were so unperturbed and unconcerned about this whole Jesus thing was that the Romans, every time that they conquered an area, and they went into a new country, and they had new gods, and they looked at those gods and they thought, oh, well, that's an interesting one, or that seems like a pretty powerful one, or that's unique. They just adopted them. So Rome had many, many, many gods. So they weren't concerned about this at all. So they did believe in the afterlife. And if you look at a lot of their gods, you'll see that they are gods that have been, I don't want to use the word reincarnated, but they just basically stay on, and they morph into different things. You'll go into Greek mythology and that, and you'll also see it with the Romans. So in verse 20, and because I was uncertain of such questions, I asked whether he was willing to go to Jerusalem and there be judged concerning these matters. That's not the truth. The reason why he turned around and he said, hey, let's go down to Jerusalem. Are you willing to go to Jerusalem, and let's go and face the Sanhedrin down there? Remember, he wanted to curry favor with the Jews. He knew that there was a plot to kill Paul, and he was saying, no, fine, we'll go down there. And he was drawing favor from the Jews. So he knew that was what the case was. But now he's playing dumb, and he's saying, oh, well, because I didn't know about all this religious stuff. Morning, Miss Lacey. Morning, Mr. Carr. And because now he's playing dumb, and he's saying, I don't know about these religious things. Therefore, that's why I wanted to take him down there. And he uses the same argument now to kind of curry favor with Agrippa later on. And he says here, so I commanded him to be kept, verse 21, but when Paul appealed to be reserved for the decision of Augustus, that's the Caesar, I commanded him to be kept till I could send him to Caesar. So he's saying, Paul said, no, I want to appear in front of Caesar, so therefore we couldn't go down to Jerusalem to go and get to the bottom of all of this religious stuff, which I don't understand.
Right. Agrippa was Hasmonean, wasn't he? Wasn't he in the...
no, he was a Edomite. He was half Jew, half Edomite, okay? So, now this Agrippa, he answers Festus now. Now this is the king, the puppet king that Rome has got there, okay? Now the reason why I say he was a puppet king is, one, he wasn't really in line to be king, because he truly wasn't a Jew. He was half an Edomite. Now, an Edomite comes from Esau, and if you look back even in the Jewish line of things, and then also look what God said. He said, Jacob have I loved, Esau have I hated. So that's where the Jews draw their line from. They're definitely not from the Edomites. So the Jews looked down upon him, and because he was of a mixed origin or race or heritage, the Jews are very discriminatory about that. And if you are what they would call a half-breed, you are out. Now, he still had a passion for and wanted to be known as a Jew. So he spent a lot of time researching this kind of stuff and researching the religion and trying very hard to be a Jew, but they never would accept him. So, So then Agrippa, in verse 22, then Agrippa said to Festus, I also would like to hear the man myself. Tomorrow, he said, you shall hear him. So now Agrippa's listening to this argument. You see, okay, fair enough. He's all puffed up because Felix is basically stroking his ego and saying, hey, Agrippa, you're a Jew. You know about all these things. Why don't you listen to the case? You give me some advice, and then I can present this to Rome. So verse 23, so the next day when Agrippa and Bernice, notice that and Bernice again, okay, keeps on, Agrippa and, it keeps on going with this woman and Bernice, had come with great pomp and had entered the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city. At Festus's command, Paul was brought in. So you got to picture the scene, okay, so at Caesarea, there's this, what they call a amphitheater, and an amphitheater is that half-round sunken structure. So you, like the one at Caesarea, it's on the side of a cliff, and cut into the cliff is a half-round structure with all these seatings, okay, these stone benches. And then what they've done at the bottom of that is a stage over here. You've got all these benches going up into the cliff in this half-round formation. Then here's the stage. And behind the stage like that, they've built a massive wall. And in the day it was even higher. So what happens now, the guys on the stage, they speak, that sound bounces off the benches, comes back and bounces again. And it's amazing. You can be right up at the top there, and you can hear the guys speaking down here. They didn't have to wear headsets. So, yeah, it's a good thing. And, I refer all the time to that a hypocrite, that Hippocrate, and Jesus calls people of the church and in their religion, they're hypocrites. That's where it comes from. It comes out of those amphitheaters, because they could sit so far back that they could hear what was being said, but they couldn't see the expression on the actor's face. So the actor had to hold a mask in front of his face with a big exaggerated smile or a big downcast face or tears. And that's where we get the masks for our theaters, that happy and sad face. So this is where they enter into. It's not just a little meeting between Agrippa, Felix, and Paul. This is now a sold-out theater. This is now a big deal.
Now wait, is it Felix or Festus?
Which one are we on now? No, we are on the second guy. We are on Festus. Okay. Festus, okay? The Adams family. So, this thing is sold out. Agrippa comes in with, all the trumpets and everything else, and all the pomp and the ceremony. Festus is there as well. And what have they all come to see? They haven't come to see the king and the ruler. They've come to see this little old guy. This little old guy right here is roughly about 59 years old. And at this time, he's been scourged 3 times, I believe. He's already been shipwrecked. He's spent a day and a night out in the open ocean, floating around there. He's been stoned. He's been stoned a couple of times. And historians say that he was a short guy. He was bent over. He was bow-legged. He had this big old hook nose. He must have looked a picture after being stoned to death a few times and then scorched and everything else. He wasn't much to look at. So you've got this whole amphitheater waiting, and I can imagine the trumpets and the ceremony and the pomp and everything. Oh, here's the king, and here's this ruler, and here's Paul. And that's what they're waiting on. Funny that verse that speaks of God will use the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. And here comes little old Paul coming in. And he's going to sit before the wise Agrippa. And so it says there, so they enter the auditorium with the commanders and the prominent men of the city. At Festus's command, Paul was brought in. So verse 24, and Festus said, And here we go again with just the elaborate speech that means nothing.
Sounds like a lawyer.
Exactly. King Agrippa and all the men who are here present with us, you see this man about whom the whole assembly of the Jews petitioned me, both at Jerusalem and here, crying out that he was not fit to live any longer. Well, right there should be a little flag that comes up. If this is just one little man saying stuff, why is this established faith going back thousands of years that is convinced that they are correct? Why are they in uproar against him? Surely they should just be like, oh, whatever, it's just one little bow-legged, ugly little man. Forget about it. But here's the uproar. It's funny how that word of truth will really get underneath somebody's skin. So, verse 25. But when I had found that he had committed nothing deserving of death, and that he himself had appealed to Augustus, that is Caesar, I decided to send him. I'm going to just back up to Augustus. Why he refers to him as Augustus? Okay, so Octavius, the previous, an earlier Caesar, from Octavius's time, the Caesars started going by Augustus because it's the august one, the one that you should just be in awe of. Okay, so that's what they went by. Then you get to this one, who is later on it changes to Caesar Nero. Okay, because Nero actually believed that he wasn't just a god. Nero started saying, I am God. And he believed it. He went totally nuts. This is the same Nero that started really persecuting the Jews big time. Nero is the guy that started taking Christians and dipping them in boiling wax and then tying them to posts and lighting them up in his garden, in his palatial gardens at nighttime. And then he'd ride on his chariot butt naked and he'd be shouting, you're the light of the world, you're the light of the world. And this is the kind of thing that Nero did. He went off his head, he went totally mad. This is the same guy that burnt down the city. And it says he was playing his fiddle, he was playing the fiddle, and then afterwards he blamed it on the Christians, saying that the Christians were the ones. So he had an axe to grind against the Christians. Why? Here, I think this is probably where it starts. And so, in verse 26, beg your pardon, in verse 26, this is still now Felix speaking, and he says, I have nothing certain to write to my Lord, he's talking about now to Caesar, concerning him. Therefore, I brought him out before you, and especially before you, King Agrippa, so that after the examination has taken place, I may have something to write. In other words, something to write to Rome, so there's a decent charge, so that when he gets there, I don't look like an idiot. Verse 27, for it seems to me unreasonable to send a prisoner and not specify the charges against him. So he lays out his case, and this is why he's doing it. Paul now is going to get the opportunity to speak. Now beforehand, Paul was given the opportunity to address the Jews by Felix. And remember, he literally took maybe not even a minute if you read what he said. That was his testimony. Now he's going to give another version of his testimony, and it's a much longer version of his testimony. And it's something that I tell everybody, and that is, you need to know what your testimony is. The Bible actually says be ready to give a reason to everybody when they ask you, okay, so what is the reason that you have and have placed your hope in Jesus Christ? In other words, be ready to give your testimony. And there should be a long and a short version. If it's going to be a 2-minute conversation, you need to be able to give a version, i.e., once I was lost, now I was saved. Here's why. Bang. There comes a time where there needs to be a more detailed account, because that person will come back and they'll probably say to you, hey, you said this back then, tell me more. And now you need to be able to get into the depth of it. So here, chapter 26, verse 1, then Agrippa said to Paul, you are permitted to speak for yourself. Well, thanks very much. So Paul stretched out his hand Now notice Paul's done this once before. He stretched out his hand. What's going on here? It's a Roman custom. What that salute is, because that's basically what it is. It's a salute. I don't know what sort of salute it is. I mean, through the ages, we've seen many salutes. You've got your military salutes. You've got your Hail Hitler salute. This was a salute. I'm not too sure how it went. But what Paul is doing here, it's almost like a form of respect. And it would be the same as if you go to the East and you meet an Oriental person. The guy bows down to you. Out of respect, you'd greet him in the same way. Okay, you'd bow down. So here Paul is showing respect, and he answers for himself. Verse 2, I think myself happy, King Agrippa, because today I shall answer for myself before you concerning all the things of which I am accused by the Jews, especially because you are expert in all customs and questions. Now remember, who was Paul? Paul was an incredibly learned scholar. So Paul, I think, is just kind of having fun here, and it's tongue-in-cheek. And he says, you know what, Felix, you can blow smoke. Watch, I'll really blow smoke. And that's what he's doing. And he says to him, I regard you as an expert, and I'm an expert on the subject, so you must be a double expert. So what now? So he says, because you're an expert in all customs and questions which have to do with the Jews, therefore, I beg you to hear me patiently. Sit tight, Agrippa, get comfortable. It's going to take a while. That's what he's saying. And verse 4, my manner of life from my youth, which was spent from the beginning amongst my own nation at Jerusalem, all the Jews know. My past, that's not a question of dispute. Okay? Verse 5, they knew me from the first, if they were willing to testify that according to the strictest sect of our religion, I lived a Pharisee. So even there, Paul is bringing to our attention, hey, there are different sects, and people believe different things. And now he's laying the groundwork, and he's saying, this here is still based on Judaism. It's not a whole different religion. There's still the base that we're talking about. And in men's study, we actually hit on something interesting the other day, and that was that Judaism, the Old Testament, that's the root of our faith. And we come along as Christians, and we are, the Bible tells us, we are grafted in. Grafting is when there's a plant that has a strong root system, it's well established, and either the entire top part of the plant is cut off and a new part is attached to it, or a branch is cut off and a part of another plant is attached to that. That plant that is attached, i.e. Christians, the Christian faith, if it didn't have that root system, it would die. And that's why I keep on going back to the Old Testament. If we don't have a firm understanding of the Old Testament, that's our root system. If we don't have that Old Testament root system, the New Testament is not going to be understood by us. I keep on going back to the fact that God is not finished with the Jewish nation, the nation of Israel, that they are going to come back. That is what Paul refers to in his writings as well. And he says, yeah, we're grafted in, but don't despise the Jew. Don't despise your root system. Don't think that, oh, they're gone and now it's all about the church. Because your basis is still that whole Jewish faith, which is the beginning of and part of Christianity. So here Paul is saying, so I lived very, very strictly according to the sect, which was the Pharisees. And he's obviously making reference to them. They're sitting right there. So verse 6, and now I stand and I am judged for the hope. Okay, now he's talking about the hope. What is the hope? This is Jesus Christ. Of the promise made by God. So now he's saying, so now I'm getting judged by the Pharisees, who I was a part of, and I'm getting judged for this hope. These guys believe in it as well. The Jewish people, both the Pharisees and the Sadducees, and all the other little sects, they all believed in a coming Messiah. And they still do. And Paul's simply saying, okay, so I'm one of them, but now they want to judge me for something that they actually believe in. Something's wrong here. And he's saying this hope that was the promise made by God to our fathers. Verse 7, to this promise our 12 tribes, earnestly serving God night and day, hope to obtain. His reference here to the 12 tribes. Paul is an incredibly intelligent man. He doesn't say anything without purpose. So Paul here says, okay, there's 12 tribes. At this point, there weren't 12 tribes. There was 2 tribes. Remember, there had been a split. The 10 northern tribes had been carried off. And at this time period, they was, if you want to use the word lost, they weren't around. But Paul is still saying, hey, no, there's 12 tribes here. And the 10 northern tribes that were carried off, they indeed came back. When they went into captivity, they went up to Babylon and that. They went up into captivity for 70 years. Normally, 2 generations, when a country is overcome by another country, 2 generations later, that original people cease to exist. They get assimilated into that conquering country, and they don't exist. The Jewish nation went up to Babylon for 70 years. They held on to their Jewishness. They came back. They were still Jews. They still had all their belief system in that, and they sprung up again. So Paul's saying here, okay, so there's 12 tribes. That in itself is a miracle. And then he says, and they're still earnestly serving God day and night in this hope to attain. They're waiting for the Savior. For this hope's sake, King Agrippa, I am accused by the Jews. Why should it be thought incredible by you that God raises the dead? So now what he's done is he's just laid the foundation here, and he's turned around and he says, okay, here's the evidence. This bunch of Pharisees that are sitting here, they are a result of these tribes that came back. Now, if God can save these 12 tribes, save these tribes, and has kept these tribes after all this captivity, and he's basically resurrected them, what's the big deal? Why are you so worried about and concerned that the resurrection of Christ can't be a reality? Why do you think it's that incredible that God raises from the dead? That's the real issue. They're questioning this raising from the dead. So verse 9, indeed I myself thought I must do many things contrary to the name of Jesus of Nazareth. This is when he's going around and he's persecuting the church. This I also did in Jerusalem, and many of the saints are shut up in prison, having received authority from the chief priests. These guys sitting right in front of you here, right now persecuting me, they gave me this authority. And when they were put to death, I cast my vote against them, and I punished them often in every synagogue, and compelled them to blaspheme. And being exceedingly enraged against them, I persecuted them even to foreign countries. So now the same group of people that are sitting here in front of you that gave me letters to go and persecute somebody else are now persecuting me. Verse 12. While he was busy persecuting, this is Paul talking, while I was on this crusade to persecute this Christian faith, while thus occupied as I journeyed to Damascus with authority and commission from the chief priests at midday, O King, along the road I saw a light from heaven brighter than the sun shining around me and those who journeyed with me. And when we all had fallen to the ground, I heard a voice speaking to me, saying in the Hebrew language, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is hard for you to kick against the goads. So, right in this testimony, Paul now is going to his personal testimony. He's given the history of this thing, but now he's going to his personal testimony. That is interesting to me because of what Jesus said to him. He said to him, hey, Paul, why are you kicking against the goad? The goad that he's referring to is a long, sharp stick. When you wanted to drive cattle, what you'd do is you'd walk with a long, sharp stick. If the cattle, the ox, kicked back against it, all he would do is spike himself harder, and it would cause pain, and therefore, the cattle would move on. When we used to dive in South Africa, a lot of people here ask about, what about the sharks? And yeah, there's a ton of sharks there. And pretty much everywhere where you dive and there's reef fish, the moment you shoot the fish, the sharks will come in because they set off that vibration and they come rushing in. Well, there's a trick to it, and that is when the shark comes in at you, you would think if you got this big old spear gun, because I mean our spear guns were like literally just over 6 foot long, and you got these massive bands on them. There's a technique to putting those bands on there, so they are so tough that there's a way that you have to string these on, and then our guns would have multiple bands. So when you shot this thing, I mean, you drive a spear through a shark. That's not a problem. But if you shot the shark with your spear gun, what then? You now got the shark on the end of a line, and if you don't kill that thing, you've got an angry shark that you're holding on to, and you've got no other form of protection. So what you do is you don't shoot the shark. You simply take the spear gun and you hold it up against your chest. And when the shark swims in on you, you just kind of aim it such that he'll swim up against it, and then he'll push you in the water, and then you turn your body, and he'll brush off, and he'll go, and then he'll turn and he'll come back at you. After a couple of times of having that sharp point poked in his own nose, he loses interest, and he moves off.
I wouldn't still be in the water.
You're talking about walking on water.
But that's how you protect yourself. And Paul is saying here, this is exactly what Jesus said to him. So what did Jesus in fact saying to him? Hey Paul, I'm laying the truth out in front of you. You stood with Stephen and you saw something on Stephen's face. When Stephen was put to death and you cast your vote, you saw something and you heard something. And now I've laid it out for you, but you keep on kicking, you dumb ox. How's that working out for you? And it's almost like Jesus tongue-in-cheek is saying, so, hey dumb ox, how's all this refusal to believe working out? You're kicking against the goad. Verse 15, so I said, who are you, Lord? And he said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. When we touched on this, when the actual occasion took place earlier on in this book, we commented there, his statement, who are you, Lord? He knew exactly who he was. And that's why Jesus' first statement, hey, you know who I am, I'm Jesus. Why are you still kicking against the goad? Why are you still refusing? And then his answer, he says, I am Jesus who you're persecuting. I love this. But rise and stand on your feet. You've messed up. You've messed up totally. You've been a dumb ox. You've made mistakes, just like you and me. But the command, but rise and stand on your feet. You don't have to hang your head in shame. You don't have to grovel. Get up. And that's the thing with Christ. He always retains and maintains our dignity. And then he says, for I have appeared to you for this purpose, to make you a minister and a witness, both of the things which you have seen and of the things which I will yet reveal to you. I will deliver you from the Jewish people as well as from the Gentiles, to whom I now send you, to open their eyes in order to turn them from the darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and inheritance among those who are sanctified by faith in me. This little section here is crucial because he is quoting what Jesus said to him. And this is his testimony. Your testimony, and I've seen this time and time again, not by you, but by people giving their testimony. Oftentimes a person giving their testimony, they will stand there and it's a whole woe is me. Look what I've been through in life, woe is me. And they get to the end of it and all you've got is, man, we really feel sorry for you. How is that glorifying to God? That's not your testimony. Your testimony is simply, this is what God allowed me to go through. Here's the purpose, and this is what he did. So if you want to just deliver a woe is me speech for the purpose of getting people to look at you, wow, you're so great, look what you managed to overcome in life, you've missed the point totally. There you're bringing glory to yourself, not to God. So here Paul is giving the message of that hope that he has and why he has it. That should be the crux of your testimony. And your testimony is not about you, it's testifying to what God has done and will do. So verse 19, now that he gives his testimony, he says, therefore, King Agrippa, I was not disobedient to the heavenly vision, but declare it first to those in Damascus and in Jerusalem and throughout all the region of Judea, and then to the Gentiles, that they should repent and turn to God and do works befitting for repentance. We have, in our Christian faith, taken it upon us to create something called missionaries. And missionaries base their existence upon this verse where Jesus said, I'm going to send you first to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the outer reaches of the earth or the world. Hasn't Paul just said there that's what he did? And the reason I say that, if that scripture is fulfilled, what are we doing traveling all over the globe to go and minister to other people that have already got the gospel? Because right now, as we speak, there is only one place on earth that there isn't the gospel message given to, and that's a tribe on an island, and it's actually forbidden by anybody to go onto that island. Then you're not allowed to go there. And this tribe, there has been somebody that's landed there and they got killed. And I cannot remember which worldly convention decided this, but that is the only place that the gospel has not reached. It's the only tribe that civilization hasn't come to, and they're going to keep it that way. But the gospel message has gone all over the world. So why are we still sending missionaries to different places? Why are we not ministering to the neighbor, the person that's living right next door to us? So, where was I? Verse 21. For these reasons the Jews seized me in the temple and tried to kill me. Therefore, having obtained help from God, to this day I stand witness both to small and great, saying no other things than those which the prophets and Moses said would come, and that Christ would suffer, and that he would be the first to rise from the dead, and would proclaim the light to the Jewish people and to the Gentiles. Paul made a statement there. He said, I received help from God. Well, hold on a second. Wasn't it Felix that helped him out? Remember, they were about to stone him in the temple, and in the temple, and it was Felix and the soldiers that ran down and got a hold of Paul. But Paul's statement here, I received help from God. Felix was just a puppet being used by God. He wasn't a godly man, but he was still being used by God. The implication here to old King Agrippa, you're also just a puppet, and your strings are being pulled by God. Paul's not really making friends right here, but he's kind of just laying it out. And verse 24, interesting as he said this now, verse 24, now as he made his defense, Festus, who's the one that took over from Felix, and Paul has just said Felix was just a puppet of God, therefore Festus, you also are a puppet, said in a loud voice, Paul, you're beside yourself, you're nuts. Much learning is driving you mad. Paul, all this education, you've gone nuts. You're not making sense. Yet Paul's making perfect sense. He just doesn't want to hear it. Verse 25, but he said, I'm not mad, most noble Festus, but I speak the words of truth and reason. For the king before whom I speak freely knows these things. Oops. Festus, keep quiet, son. I'm talking to the king. There's that little saying, when the doctor speaks to the patient, the disease shuts up. That's basically what he's saying to him right here. And then he says, for the king before whom I speak freely knows these things. You do know this, O king. You're wise, O king. For I'm convinced that none of these things escapes his attention. So now he's talking about the king to the king, and he's kind of putting him in a little box. He says, well, you know what I'm saying is true. I know that you surely do believe these things, because how could you not, since you're so learned about the faith? And then he says, since this thing was not done in a corner, he's saying here that this is done openly. King, you know the law, you know what the scriptures say, and you also know the truth of the matter. Verse 27. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets, the Old Testaments? You've read them. I know that you do believe. So now he's basically saying to King Agrippa, hey, you've read the Old Testament. Now you see the fulfillment of it here in Jesus Christ. Time for you to make a choice. That's the same with you and I. You speak to someone, you give them your testimony, you tell them the truth. It's not up to you to convince them. They have to make a choice. Choice is on them. Verse 28. Then Agrippa said to Paul, you almost persuaded me to become a Christian. Now, go back to the setting. He's sitting in this amphitheater. There are literally hundreds, if not in the thousands of people sitting there watching this whole thing. And he admits in front of everybody, you almost persuaded me. I'm right on the brink. And then Paul responds there. He says, and Paul said, I would to God that not only you, but also all who hear me today might become both almost and altogether such as I am, except for these chains. So Paul's saying, my heart's desire is that you truly would become just like me. Not these chains, but a Christian. Okay? And the reference there to the chains is not just those physical chains, but the fact that even that king and everybody around there is in bondage. And here's the thing with this whole Christianity thing. There's a story of this very devout Christian man, and he has a problem. And he goes to see his rabbi, and he says to his rabbi, maybe you can help me. He says, I'm a devout Jew. I've brought up my son under the Jewish faith. He knows the law. He knows the scriptures. We keep all the festivals and everything. He says, but he's now become a Christian. And the rabbi said, interesting that you asked me that question. He says, I'm a rabbi. I too have brought my son up in a Jewish home under the scriptures. And my son too has become a Christian. And the two of them are sitting there perplexed, and the rabbi says to him, I actually went and asked God about this. And the young Jew man says to him, well, what did God say? And God said, my son too has become a Christian. But this Christianity thing is not about head knowledge. If you argue somebody into Christianity based upon head knowledge, somebody else can come along and argue them out of Christianity. It has to be a heart conviction. Okay? So verse 30. When he had said these things, the king stood up, as well as the governor, and there's that big old and Bernice, and those who sat with them. Why do I keep on referencing this and Bernice? I think the only reason that Agrippa didn't give over totally at this point is the and Bernice. Because it's this and Bernice. Agrippa has got this woman who is prone and has got a history of just going from one man to the next, and he's trying hard to keep her. The Bible is not going to keep on putting this and Bernice in for no reason. And you kind of wonder, why didn't Agrippa, seeing the sense of this, being a scholar, wanting and has spent his whole life trying to be a devout Jew, and he says there, he acknowledges, I was almost persuaded to become a Christian. Why didn't he take that final step? What was keeping him?
Could she be a representative of Satan?
Yeah.
Representation of
Okay.
evil.
She is the epitome of evil. She really and truly is. This is, man, a couple of years from now, what happens is, well, actually very soon after this, she actually leaves him, and then starts, I don't know what you want to call it, dating, whatever. I'm trying to be polite. It's Sunday morning. She, with the next, with one of the Roman emperors. And she has got such a bad reputation that when she goes back to Rome, they actually don't want her around. Now think about the Romans, how promiscuous and immoral they were. And they turn around and they say, we don't want this wayward woman around here. So that gives you an idea of what she is all about. And I honestly think this is the anchor that is holding this guy back. And to you and to me, it's kind of like, okay, so what is my and Bernice? What is it that's stopping me from jumping in wholeheartedly with God? And oftentimes, I think it's the desire to please man, not to be viewed by man as, oh, there goes one of those Jesus freaks. You know, they're too radical, that's just crazy. I think it's a question we all have to ask ourselves at some point. What is my Bernice? So now that everybody is being dismissed and leaving, and Bernice, and those who sat with them, verse 31. And when they had gone aside, they talked amongst themselves, saying, this man is doing nothing deserving of death or chains. Then Agrippa said to Festus, this man might have been set free if he had not appealed to Caesar. What Agrippa has just turned around there and said to Festus is, good luck, dude, you're on your own. I can't come up with a reason for you to take him and charge him and take him up to Caesar. You're on your own on this one. You should have let him go right in the get-go. Notice this. He says there that Paul would have been set free. But Paul in Acts 19 says, I must needs go to Rome. That was on Paul's agenda. Now, we would have looked at this and said, man, Paul, if you just kept your mouth shut, you would have been free. But yet it's this very thing of not being free that is going to get him to where God wants him to go. How often in our lives something happens and we look at it as, oh, woe is me, instead of looking at, okay, what's going on in this storm that's in my life right now? What is the lesson for me to learn? And this is something that I am coming to learn and learning, is when that storm hits, is to kind of sit back and look at what's going on. What is the bigger picture? What is the life lesson for me in this storm? And what I've seen is if I try and get out of the storm, or I don't learn the life lesson, that storm kind of circles and comes back. When I was in South Africa, one of the apartments that I had overlooked the bay. And I'd often sit on the balcony. It was on the 14th floor. I'd sit on the balcony and I'd watch storms moving in. And they'd come in, hit the land, circle, and go out. But every time that they came back in, they were just a little bit stronger, a little bit more fierce. And that's the same with God in teaching us. You can get out of the storm. And you may think you've succeeded, but that storm's going to come back around until you learn the lesson. And I mean, so often, you'll do something wrong and really fret about it. And then the disaster that you thought was going to come, the consequence of your action doesn't come, and you're like, phew, I got out of that one. And before you know it, you're doing the same thing again. And then the disaster, you skip the disaster again and again and again and again. And eventually the disaster hits. And when the disaster does hit, it's like, well, why? Why is it so bad now? Because you didn't learn the lesson the first time around. So in chapter 27, Paul is now going to head on up to Rome. At this point, Paul is roughly 59 years old. And he's going to make a sea voyage, which is a dangerous thing. And he's going to go up and go and see Caesar. And when it was decided that we should sail to Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to one named Julius, a centurion of the Augustan regiment. Notice in the Bible, the centurions are always spoken of pretty highly. And it's funny because these centurions were given a lot of power, and they were in charge of a lot of men. They had a lot of men underneath them. One thing you will see in the military, and I think it's universal, guys that are commanding a lot of men and do it well normally have integrity. It's funny, men will not follow a coward. Men will not follow somebody that has their word means nothing. But if you've got an officer commanding a group of men, and men have faith in that commander, they'll follow that commander to the death. And this is how these centurions are spoken of over and over again in the Bible. So they're delivered to, Paul's delivered to this Julius. And verse 2, so entering a ship of that place, Adramyttium, we put to sea, meaning to sail along the coast of Asia. Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica, was with us, and the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and to receive care. This is unusual. Paul here is delivered to this guy, Julius. They've only been together a short space of time, but this centurion has enough faith in Paul and says to Paul, fine, you can go ashore when they when they make this stop at this port. You can go to your friends, go and get supplies and things. If this centurion, if Paul had run and this centurion had lost Paul as his prisoner, he would have been put to death under Roman law. But he has so much faith in Paul and trust in him that he says to him, okay, go. Off he goes, and he comes back. That tells you something about Paul's character. Verse 3, and the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him liberty to go to his friends and receive care. So verse 4, when we had put to sea from there, we sailed under the shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed over the sea, which is off Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra, a city of Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing to Italy as he put us on board. This is not here for no reason. Paul is kind of pointing out the time of the year, the route that they're sailing, and this is why now in verse 7. When we had sailed slowly many days and arrived with difficulty off Sinaitis, the wind not permitting us to proceed, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salmone. Passing it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens near the city of Lycia. What's going on now is this time of the year, the predominant winds are coming from the north. They're trying to sail north. Paul is setting the tone here and saying, look, the seasons are showing us it's not the wise thing to sail north. And this captain is kind of ducking behind islands and using all his knowledge. So this is a wise captain that we're talking about, okay? So verse 9, now when much time had been spent and sailing was now dangerous because the fast, this is Passover, was already over, Paul advised them, saying, men, I perceive that this voyage will end with disaster and much loss, not only of the cargo of the ship, but also of our lives. So Paul here is just using, it's not supernatural wisdom. He's saying, I perceive. It's not like the Holy Spirit told me so. He's literally just saying, hey, you can see what the winds are doing. That there should speak to every single Christian, you and I. You've got biblical knowledge, but God's not calling you to be a fool. You need to use practical common sense in your walk as well, in navigating your Christian faith. If you come across a Bernice, like we've just had here, Agrippa, this king, was presented with the gospel from probably one of the greatest men that has walked around spreading the gospel other than Jesus Christ. Agrippa was given this opportunity. He was given a one-on-one Bible study lesson. Agrippa had studied the Old Testament scriptures, yet he turned it down. Why? Because of the Bernice in his life. The warning to us here is navigate your faith carefully. And not just using the scriptures, but use common sense in who you hang around with. Don't go and put a Bernice in your life that's going to hold you back and is going to cause you literally to die. It's going to shipwreck your faith. So Paul's saying here, I perceive, and this is what's going to happen. Verse 11, nevertheless the centurion was more persuaded by the helmsman, in other words the captain of the ship, and the owner of the ship than by the things spoken by Paul. Paul laid out and showed us, and Luke is recording for us how smart this captain was. So this captain sailed around islands, and he sailed in places where the wind was blocked, and he did all this really clever stuff. But Paul has got something that the captain hasn't got. Paul has already been in shipwrecks. Paul has already floated around in the open ocean for a day and a night. Paul has got some life experience here. Don't ignore your life experience. Verse 12, and because the harbour was not suitable to winter, the majority advised to set sail from there, if by any means they could reach Phoenix, a harbour of Crete, opening towards the southwest and northwest, and winter there. This harbour is only 68 miles away from where they are. And it says there, because this, where they were at a little Hicktown harbour. It was an open water harbour, not built with a big sea wall around it. But more than that, there was nothing going on. There were no fancy restaurants, there was no casino, there was no nightclubs. And the sailors wanted to get to this other harbour. That's the reason. That's why it says there, because. And they're kind of saying, well, it's only 68 miles away. Let's head for Tinseltown. And Paul's saying, be careful. It's not the wise thing to go. Everything that we read in the Bible, look at it in the sense of, okay, here's the physical story of what's happening. These guys are in a boat. Here's their destination. Here's where they are. Here's where they want to be because they want to go to Tinseltown. Here's this literal woman, Bernice. But then take all these things and start looking at the story behind the story. You've got a king who's been given the opportunity and is witnessed to, and he has got a heavenly destination, just like Paul and them on the boat were going to Rome. There's a destination way out here. But the king, his faith was shipwrecked right there by this Bernice. Paul and them in the boat, they should have stayed where they were, but the sailors wanted to get to Tinseltown. We wanted to go to something fancy, and they're going to end up getting shipwrecked, and they're not going to get to their final destination. Start looking at all these scriptures. Yes, there's a physical, but there's also a spiritual, and this is what this is saying to us. It's not written all these boring facts. Oh, they sailed around this island, they went here. Typically, we just gloss over it, but there's nothing in the Bible that's written there without a reason. So start looking at it from the spiritual aspect and see what is God saying to you and to me personally. Examine today, what is the Bernice in my life that's going to shipwreck my faith? What is the thing that's going to hold me back? And chances are you're going to see that God's already warned you once before, but you keep on going back and making the same mistake. Let's pray.